Welcome to the last session in the Awakening the Gift from Your Ancestors session. And I've had a really interesting time looking at my own ancestors, and I hope you have as well. I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about at the beginning of the session today, and my great-grandparents came to mind, because one of the big things for me is how complex the psychological history of my ancestors is. Because we're not just talking about, the genetic stuff, the family trees, the family maps, all of that. We're talking about the positive messages and the disempowering messages and the view about life and the attitudes towards life carried through the life experience of our ancestors, through their suffering and through their joy, through their social history and through their political history. That's what we carry, and we carry much of it at an unconscious level. Some of it comes to us genetically, and some of it just comes through the family story, the story that our family tells us, but also some of it comes somatically through mirror neurons, just what we pick up from being around our parents and our grandparents and their parents and grandparents before them. So an awful lot of it is unconscious. And of course, there's also the collective shadow, which is the things that impact us that we're not even aware of from our culture. So when I was thinking about how I wanted to start today, my great-grandparents came to mind. And the first one, I'll actually, Lord Arthur Russell, son of the Duke of Bedford, was one of them. And there was this great liberal attitude. There was great education. There was really a really positive worldview. But of course, there was also the British ruling class as well, all of that. So there was a Nobel Prize winner in the family. There was a prime minister in the family. Bertrand Russell went to prison for being a conscientious objector in the First World War. There was lots of really quite good stuff, but there was also the who believed, of course, that it was okay to have an empire and to rule an empire. Arthur Russell married a French woman called Laura de Perronnet, who I don't know anything much about. I only know two stories about her. She was a journalist. She was in the siege of Paris in 18 something. And so she was quite, liberated in a way. And also, I may have got a little bit of the flirt in me from her, because when she was introduced to the King of England, she dropped her handkerchief and the king had to pick up her handkerchief and pass it back to her, which is not the normal behavior that you would have with the King of England. And then on, their son, Gilbert Russell, married someone called Maud Nelke, who was the daughter of a German Jew, and the rest of his family was wiped out in the Holocaust. So you've got this sort of British entitlement, marrying, disappearing in the Holocaust. And then, of course, Maud Nelke's mother, my grandmother on my father's side mother, was an ethnic German. So there's all of that that's there as well. And then on my mother's side, we've got this military family. There were bullies. My mother was a bit of a bully. My sisters admitted that my mother was a bully. We know that, that her father was a bully, and and there was this very strong military family. And they were, of course, they weren't the ones who set up the rules for the British Empire. They were the foot soldiers of the British Empire. And so there's all of that I carry in my ancestral history. And then I don't know much about my mother's mother, but she was Irish. And I feel there's some sort of quite dark, lower middle class suffering that comes from those roots. So there's such a complexity that I'm still finding out about. And the problem in finding out about it, of course, is that it's not just a family tree. It's not just ages, dates, jobs, all of those things. It's what were the messages that they put out, that they had. What were their beliefs? What were their attitudes? What were their sufferings? What were their joys? How was that communicated to their children? And so it's very, very touching. It's such an interesting thing for me to explore, because most of psychotherapy and the psychological world focuses on our own lives and how we were parented by our parents. That's what most of psychotherapy focuses on. But of course, we're much, much more than that. We carry all of these things to do with our ancestral lineage. The first two principles that we covered on the course was, what are the gifts? Let's always start with the gifts. You know, I've got a lot of great things from my ancestors, a lot of great attitudes and abilities that I've got from my ancestors. But I've also got all these disempowering messages as well. So that's the second thing. We need to transform, bring healing. Just bringing attention to the unconscious messages from your ancestors is, with a loving heart, is a healing act in itself. Just to become aware that there are influences that you were not aware of is a really great starting point. And to have that in presence, to bring presence, to bring the your warm, tender heart in the present moment, to noticing the voice, the feeling of a particular ancestral lineage, and having compassion for that, because it, on the one hand, it's produced you, but it's not you. You know, I'm not responsible for the actions of my ancestors. No, I'm not. I'm responsible for understanding the actions of my ancestors and seeking to make an impact in the world that is more complete, that is more whole. But I'm not even responsible for putting right what my ancestors did. I'm just responsible for being the best person I can in the world based on all the inputs that I've got. And so then during that session on what disempowers you, we talked about trauma, we talked about transgenerational trauma, and we also talked about guardians, that particularly if you have significant trauma, and by the way, of course, you know, trauma in your grandparents, trauma in your parents can be trauma in you. It can, you know, anything that was in your grandparents that was traumatic could still be in you. That to have sort of inner guardians or inner protectors who just only let you taste a little bit at a time. You know, the modern understanding of trauma is that you titration or sipping, just little. You have a resourceful, curious, warm, tender heart, and then you just taste a little bit of the difficulty, and then you back off. Taste a little bit of the difficulty, and then back off. And so that's sort of the healthy way of healing trauma, not just to keep falling into it head first, but the process of being able to back off away from the feeling is just as important as the process to just taste that old feeling, transform that old feeling. And then we had a session which Celine ran on what if you don't know who your ancestors were, if you were an orphan? And also, what if you have a feeling that's really strong that traditional therapeutic methods don't handle very well, that don't deal with very well, and you don't know where it comes from? You know, because it could be, you know, it could just be from early years of life, first year of life, or womb experience. There is research on how anxiety in the mother gets transmitted to the child. I don't think we know enough about that yet, but follow your intuition. If there's something really early in your life that's a feeling that's quite pervasive, that bothers you a lot, that's where it could come from. It could, yeah, and it doesn't matter in a way whether you name it as ancestors or if you name it as parental, as coming from, you know, from that early life. The thing to do is to witness it with a warm, loving heart and say, here it is, you're welcome, but I'm much more than this, I'm more than this. And then we spent quite a difficult session, actually, last session, a really good session, but also a difficult session, looking at the collective shadows of you know, gender inequality, gender discrimination, race discrimination, class, education, sexual orientation, ability and disability, and the transphobia stuff of, you know, being, you know, how you identify as male or female. And we looked first at where we were empowered by those things. You know, I'm white, I'm sort of upper middle class, I'm educated, I'm a heterosexual male, I'm, you know, no disabilities for an average man of my age. I've got all that positive stuff. And then also I've got the disempowering stuff of, the German Jewish lineage, and also the ethnic German lineage, and then the difficult stuff from my mother's family about, the warrior. So I've got that balance. And of course, the other thing that I asked us to do was not just to look at your privilege or lack of privilege, your empowerment or lack of empowerment, but also to take into account your own psychological history. So, I've got all that sort of privilege, but I come from a really fucked up family. And it's a sort of kindness to ourselves to take it all into account. Your individual psychology that you got from your parents and that you got from your ancestors, and those structural, I call them shadows, but structural influences in the structure of our society that that can be racist, misogynist, all the rest of it, discriminates against the minority groups of different sorts. So that's really a lot to digest. So if you've done just a little bit of that for yourself, that's really great. I think this takes quite a long time. I mean, I know there are people in the room whose cultures in the 21st century were super difficult cultures, super difficult eras for our ancestors, still in the 21st century. So we have to be super kind with ourselves and with the growth process. And then today, I want us to sort of integrate, to bring together what we've learned, the processes of healing that we're engaged in, but particularly also to celebrate the good stuff from our ancestors. Because remember that the psychological approach that I advocate is that we use our resources, what's great about us, and presence to hold the space for processing transformation of emotional difficulty. So that's why it's really important to keep coming back to what's great about ourselves from my individual psychology, what's great about what I got from my parents, great that I got from my ancestors, what it's great that I've got from my society, to seek that out. When I was growing up, actually for a large number of years, I couldn't remember good memories from my childhood. I didn't have positive memories. And that was because it wasn't that good things didn't happen. It was because I was swamped by the difficult memories. And so then I had to do some archaeology in my own personal history to remember things that went well. And I actually once had said to my sisters, oh, I don't have any positive memories from my childhood. My sister Laura wrote me this sweet message with a photograph for when I was about 10 or 11, and we were on a holiday in Italy by the beach. And lilos, those plastic things that float on the water. My sister must have been, if I was 10 or 11, 7, she was 7. And she was floating out to sea on one of these lilos and getting rather frightened. And I heroically swam out and towed her back. And that was a really great moment of bonding for me and my sister. And after that, my sister had great admiration for her elder brother. I'd forgotten this until she reminded me of it. And so it's really important to do the positive archaeology, psychological archaeology, as well as for the disempowering stuff. Don't be too hungry to get your hands on the disempowering stuff. Be hungry to get your hands on the empowering parts, because that's what supports you dealing with any difficult stuff that's there that needs processing. And particularly, I want to mention we talked about the collective shadows. We've got 2 people here of Chinese ethnicity. China was a difficult place in the 20th century and still continues to be so, but there was some second half of the 20th century was very, very tough, or from 1940 something to 1980. If you're Jewish and you've come from Europe, you will have some very difficult collective shadow stuff. If you are, British upper class or middle class regretting and feeling shame about the empire, that's difficult stuff to carry. A friend of mine, I haven't seen the video yet, a friend called Chris Robertson, was being interviewed about diversity. And he started talking about, his family was sort of part of the British Empire in India, white British settlers in India running the empire. And he said, I carry really difficult stuff in my body from my ancestors who ran the British Empire. We have to be very compassionate about what it is that we carry, because if you're an oppressor, you're carrying shit. That's a good way to say it. If you're an oppressor, think what it is to be that you have to carry in your body to be an oppressor. And so that's why the psychological element's so important, because then we can, when we don't just say, God, Britain made so much money from the slave trade, I must feel guilty about that. We'll say, what sort of people, were they that could run slave ships? What do they have to do to themselves? So we really, Martin Luther King, I can't quite remember the quote actually, but it's something about, I just can't afford to hate. The only thing I can afford to do is love, because love heals us and hate destroys us. So we have to just bring love to all of those places in ourselves and in the people around us. It's the healing force. And just to be super tender about ourselves. So today I particularly want us to help us integrate what we've got from this so far. And I particularly want us to focus on the good stuff that you've got and not just get into the difficult stuff. I mean, to mention it, to name it, but to always make sure that you have a sense of the good stuff, not just the difficult stuff. So what I want to do, I know that, for example, Marina, who is here, by the way, Margot and Marina and Shlomit and Christina, you know that I prefer on these calls for everybody to have their cameras on. I know that Jahan is on a bus in Jordan, I think. So, there's some excuse, positive excuse. And there she is on the bus. It must be nighttime in Jahan. So Jahan, if you haven't got a signal, that's fine. A good excuse for not having your camera on is, if the bandwidth is so little that you can't be heard and you can't speak. And Marina's recovering from, I think she's recovering from COVID-19, had just had an afternoon nap. So sending lots of love to you, Marina. And so Margaret, it's great if you have your camera on, because what we're trying to do in these sessions is create a feeling of being in a workshop space together. I know it's hard to hug. It's the worst thing about Zoom. It's hard to hug. It's hard to have physical contact, but we still emotionally connect, and that's a beautiful thing. So I know for Marina sent me a text earlier on. Are we having a guided meditation today? Yes, we are. But I'm going to because that's what Marina really likes. But I want to have a breakout conversation first before the guided meditation. I'm going to reverse the order, because I want you to just bring together what you've got from the course so far around, what you've learned about your ancestors and the positive or disempowering messages that you've got from your ancestors, what you've learned about yourself in relation to the collective shadow, both the empowering stuff, I'm white, that is empowering, and the disempowering stuff. And so I just want us to spend some time talking about what you've got from the program so far. And then after that, we'll have some feedback into the group, and then we'll have a meditation, and then we'll see how much time we have after. So what is it? What are the resources that you've become to recognize from your ancestors? First question. And what are the difficulties that you're beginning to heal from your ancestors? And as we know, one person talks for 6 minutes, the others listen, they say, tell me more. When you're the listener, you don't give advice, you don't try and sell your product or service, you don't try and cheer the person up, you don't try and tell them that it's all okay. You just hear that you say, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. You can use reflective listening, but you're not trying to make them feel better. You're not trying to tell them that it's okay. Also, just a warning, don't look at your mobile phone, don't look at email, don't be distracted. That people pick up on that. So be as attentive as possible. Really bring your heart to the person who's talking. Really listen. So we've got 25 minutes starting now. So how was the exercise? What did you give me some input that I will then take into the meditation. Tell me where you are with receiving the gifts of your ancestors, developing the gifts of your ancestors, and healing the disempowering messages from your ancestors. Who'd like to share? Jahan.
It's a very interesting process as I was thinking of the unnecessary fears or the unnecessary burdens that I carry around in my body coming from the ancestors, which is unnecessary anymore.
Yeah.
We live through our filters, the realities we create through our filters, and if we can modify and change and update and upgrade those, then reality would change into something more beautiful. But in everything that
Jahan, it's true, but knowing that cognitively is quite different to knowing
that. Absolutely. You know, doing this exercise took me back and took me deeper into it, and to identify and to also appreciate the gems that come from it, the intentions that were the seeds, the treasures of keeping the family together, of making sure that I stay connected, to appreciate my roots, to know that life is not always rosy, and not to over shelter my kids like I was over sheltered.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do that, and I'm willing to learn.
That's difficult.
Yeah, and here they come. And so this is something that is beautiful, to take risk and to trust, to trust life, I
also think, life has been difficult for Palestinians since a long time, but certainly since the 6-Day War, and that will have an impact, not from there's a collective shadow. I remember the first time I met a Palestinian person, there were lots of there was lots of difficult stuff going on. I was frightened of meeting Palestinian people. So I want to just acknowledge that you will have been touched by that shadow. You will have been touched by lots of shadows.
And even more, Julian, because both my grandmothers come from Circassia, Caucasian, from the USSR previously, and they have been migrated as well. They were two only daughters with one of them with 2 only kids, and the other with 4 boys. And that also, there were also shadows in that. But I think it also provides immunity of some sort.
Provides community, did you say?
Immunity.
Immunity to what?
Immunity to, like, if I can think that the worst has already happened, and it's past, and I can relax now. Immunity towards staying in this agitation or worry or stress that something's going to happen. It happened.
To notice the feeling and to welcome the feeling, but to say, and this is a feeling that comes from the past. It's not to suppress the feeling or shut the feeling off, but to say, here is this feeling that comes from the past. It's welcome, but it's not about today. And just to bring your presence to that. And you've got all these beautiful skills as well. So, you have the ability to do that. So that's really great. Who else wants to share? Thank you, Jahan. That's really beautiful. Angela.
I was speaking before. I think that for me, there are 2 main shadows. One is pretty general, I think, but I started sensing it only lately, more clearly, because the fact I was relatively free, my parents were relatively liberal and so on. And nevertheless, starting to understand that I carry with me, nevertheless, a lot of unspoken and the self-explanatory beliefs about how a woman should be, about the relationship with the body, sexuality, which should not be enjoyed, actually is more of a duty, and the man can do whatever he wants. In a way, there is this sense that I carry with me. And then there is a second one that I also I touched actually last week. Maybe, I don't know, like an intrinsic a sadness, a depression, or a pessimism, which I believe is really very strong also in the Sicilian soul. I mean, we had a tradition of literature, and I'm starting crying, of literature in the 1800 and 1900, which was really pessimistic, probably because of the history of Sicily. We had all the domination coming by, taking what they wanted, destroy probably, or adapting to the environment, and then leaving or being kicked out by the next one. So, and I feel a strong connection to the history of Sicily. And probably myself, I am a mixture. When I go to Egypt, Morocco, or Tunisia, they speak to me in Arabic or in Egyptian. So who knows which background I have de facto. And Mediterranean for sure. And it includes both the African Mediterranean countries and the European one. So I think it's the two of them.
Are there any empowering things from your ancestors?
Empowering. I think that in my empowering, I think a certain independence of the women. Even on one side, my grandmother was working too, and her daughter, my aunt too, which was not so common for that generation. And in Sicily, my mother and the other grandmother didn't work, but nevertheless, they were both very strong and very independent. I had no problem in continuing living. Also, it doesn't sound very nice when the man, respectively, the husband died. They made my mother too. She is very independent. She can create her own life independently of a man. So I think
you have created your own life.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there is a lot of independence there, nevertheless.
Thank you, Angela. Nice to hear that. The Southern, and to hear about Southern Italian Catholicism. So, yeah. And what else?
I think I got some wonderful things from my parents. Humour, love of the arts, compassion for the world, spirituality, but they were also very focused on duty and hard work, and they were both workaholics, and I also became a workaholic, so much so that I felt I couldn't retire really, and I made myself ill physically and mentally a bit, and I'm still recovering. So I did retire last year, but I know a lot of it's to do with having to work so hard, because that's what I was brought up to do.
Yeah. Some of those things, you know, in a small amount, they're helpful, you know, being able to do stuff, but not to the point where it's toxic. You know, I know that you're still a very active person. So, but just to get it into control. So it's a resource. Yeah. I have the same thing about, you know, what Jahan was talking about, you know, the worst is in the past. You know, I sort of joke with my girlfriend, you know, about, you know, oh, this won't be as bad as the Normandy landings. You know, I've sort of got that in my, you know, like suffering, whatever happens isn't going to be as bad as, for me personally, is less likely to be as bad as some of the things that my ancestors faced, for me personally. And let's have other people, Angela. We don't want to get into a conversation, I don't think. Thank you, Katie. Stephanie.
Yeah, you know, I grew up in post-war Germany, and I really, you know, I have my own ancestry, biological ancestry, but also the extended ancestry by nurture from very different people who I experienced as a child, you know, growing up in my family's family business. And this current crisis, really, I experienced a lot of, or I sensed as a child, a lot of trauma you know, and I soaked up a lot of vicarious trauma from the, you know, the people around me. But this current crisis really is the first time I feel I miss these people I know and their experiences. And I kind of feel that, you know, there are a lot of implicit resources too, which are there and are available to me because of them and because of what they suffered through, and actually they survived, however troubled and damaged. So it's yeah, that is a
something for you to call on.
Yeah, that is a big surprise. I never would have expected that. But yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. My thought actually goes out to, you know, Esther. Esther, I can't think what her son is now. Well, she's Russian, but she married an American. I was just thinking about her and her family from Siberia. She's not here today. I wish she was here because, of course, you know, that's such an example of, you know, I've got someone from Siberia who works for me, you know, and she's so ashamed of what's happening at the moment. You know, we all, you know, all the sides have different traumas and different ancestral wounds. So yeah, who else wants to speak? Who else?
I have to change device. Sorry, I will connect and disconnect and connect myself.
Okay. Anyone else want to share before we do the meditation? Looks like Paul might want to.
Yes. Yes. I was in a group, Julian, with Shlomit and Marina and Stephanie. Interesting that they're in Canada and Shlomit, Canada, but with Israeli background too. And my father died when I was 3, as you know, and when he was in the Winchester prison, where I eventually became chaplain, strangely, in between 1916 and 1990.
He was a conscientious objector.
Yes, that's right, pacifist and courts-martialed.
And that's why he went to prison.
He became friends with Quakers and registered as a Quaker. Now, I visited his grave in Bournemouth only after my mother died in 2008 in order to scatter ashes. And I then saw that the inscription on his grave said, "Man of God," sorry, "Man of Peace." Now I knew that he was, and I have no idea how, because I wasn't able to speak to him, how I know lots of the books he had were peace aims in the New Order from the 30s and so on, and how he will have been impacted by the Second World War, and how he'd be horrified at the consequences of the State of Israel for Palestinian people. He didn't live to see that, although he'd be aware of it. Now, I became an Anglican Christian priest, not in denial of the Judeo-Christian roots of my own faith, but with a positivity. Now, I could probably got a lot of resources from that, but a realization that the State of Israel exists purely and simply because of centuries of Christian anti-Semitism is a bit of a problem for, you know, it's a geopolitical problem, but it's not unique in the ancestry of many, many peoples. That this kind of geopolitical consequence of wrong. Yeah. We see it in slavery too. But I've got great strength from that. But my mother was a primary influence immediately. And I then had this sense of heritage of both relatives in Dorset and no less, even more importantly, in Wales too, where the cultural, musical and political traditions spoke very strongly to me throughout my childhood. So there's quite a matrix there of mix, which at one point somebody once, when I was a young priest, said, he hoped that I was still the same mix of suppressed fury and hard work.
Thank you, Paul. There's so much here. There's so much we could talk about. I do want to actually, it was sort of named, but I want to just name the awful, I feel incredibly strong feelings. Just want to name it for the Ukrainian people. Really strong feelings for them, and all sorts of feelings about, the West's responsibility for what happened to Russia after the end of the Soviet Union. Pointing the fingers at other people never works. You have to look at your part in it. And then I also feel incredible feelings for my Russian friends who, are not happy at all, but they live in a regime where they can't have a voice. I think 6,000 people have been arrested in Russia so far. I know that when protesting at Extinction Rebellion, how frightened I am of being arrested. But imagine if I was a Russian, it would just be at least, I have to say this is a terrible thing, but I'm a white English guy. I'm not so likely to be killed by the police, But imagine being, a Russian. You just have no idea what's going to happen, with the secret police. So it's just, I feel really sadness, grief for all those, for the peoples, for the peoples on all the sides. And for the world that we've created. I think I said to you, I said it before, Gandhi's statement when a very rather entitled English journalist said to Gandhi when he first came to England, "Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of European civilization?" And Gandhi replied, "Well, I think it's a really good idea. Wouldn't it be great if Europe became civilized?" And I sort of, if European civilization, I think, well, many of the people here are European ancestry anyway, at least two aren't. But, is this the peak of civilization? And just look at the world, some part of me despairs for what my ancestors have done. And that leads me to because I want to get on with the meditation now, that leads me to wanting to find more resources. And one of the areas of ancestors that we haven't talked about are, if you like, our spiritual and psychological ancestors, not our blood lineage ancestors, but the lineages of which we are a part. So there are three, things that form your identity, maybe four things that form your identity, actually. One is the history that you have, both your own personal family history and your ancestral history, your cultural history. The second is your current circumstances in your life. And the third is your vision for the future and who you're becoming in the future, how you're recreating yourself. The best way to invent the future is to create it, or the best way to predict the future is to create it. We're all reinventing ourselves. And one of the ways that we're reinventing ourselves is by drawing on very, very strong psychological lineages, spiritual lineages, personal development lineages, philosophical lineages. So I want to include in this meditation the resource of those people and lineages that, that may not be biological, but are really strong for you. So I've got Milton Erickson, the person who's so good at the subtle transformation. I'm in his lineage. I'm in the lineage of the founder of Aikido. I'm a second Dan black belt in Aikido, of being able to, you deal with force by going alongside it. I've got my Buddhist master, who I spent 2.5 months, between 6 weeks and 2.5 months a year with for 20 years. I've got in common with Udit here, the movement of being, awareness, non-dual awareness lineage of awakening. I've got, Robert Dilts and Steve Gilligan and other people in that, my spiritual lineages. My Taoist master, Liu Su Chi, who trained me when I was 18 and 19, and other people as well. And so I wanted to draw on all those positive, and Gregory Bateson. I never met Gregory Bateson. I never met Milton Erickson. But Gregory Bateson, you may not know much of him, but, about him, it doesn't really matter that if you do or you don't, but he's such a profound influence on me. So, profound psychological influence on me. And so during this meditation, I want us to draw on that, because to hold what we personally have received from difficulty from our ancestors, we need the good stuff, but we may need more than the good stuff from our ancestors. So let's also draw on our spiritual and psychological lineages. And also, because there is such a difficult, in the field, there's so much difficulty in the world with the Ukrainian crisis. We can all feel that. It affects us all in different ways. So what are the inner, but Gandhi said, be the change you want in the world. So how can we also, not just other people, say, you're different, you're different, you're different. How can we not do that as well? How can we not be a part of that game? How can we be people who's in our own souls are creating peace? How can we find peace in our own souls as examples for the whole field, and therefore first with ourselves and then in our conversations with our friends and relatives, and just the vibe that we put out into the world. My impact may not be very big, but all I can do is do my little bit, and maybe there are people all over the world doing the same as us now. I'm sure there are in church groups all over the world, in spiritual groups all over the world, people making the same prayers. So let's resource ourselves now with this meditation. And I'll start with the 4-3-2-1 process that many of you know, which is we're going to see 4 things, hear 4 things, and feel 4 things. And then you'll see if you don't know it. So I always just settle down and just notice what I see, what I hear, what I feel. Then I take a deep breath, and some people move away from their cameras because they like to lie down or they just want to move. And so moving is fine as well. And of course, some people turn their cameras off so that they can meditate quietly. But of course, as you know, I like it when people keep their cameras on, because it supports me in leading the meditation. I'm getting input from you as well. So the first step is just letting ourselves settle down, which is what everyone's doing, making themselves comfortable. So I'm feeling my body, just noticing the sounds in the house, noticing what I see, taking a deep breath. And so notice whether your eyes are opened or closed. Notice 4 things you see. And of course, if your eyes are closed, there'll be the darkness of your eyelids. There may be specks of light on your eyelids and images in the mind's eye. And 4 things we hear, but as some of you know, I always listen to 5 things to start with. So I listen, are there sounds outside the house? And I can, if there aren't sounds outside the house, that's still a sort of hearing. Sounds in the house. Sounds in this room. Sounds in my body. And then internal dialogue, listening to, if there's a voice in my head, listening to it from a distance, as if it were someone in the room with me, who I'm curious and interested in. And then feeling 4 different feelings in your body, including a muscle, a place on your skin, and an emotional feeling in the trunk of your body. And then noticing 3 things you see. 3 things you hear. 3 things you feel. Two things you see. 2 things you hear. Two things you feel. One thing you see. One thing you hear. One thing you feel. And just putting our attention, for example, onto our breathing. Noticing the fine detail of the in-breath and the out-breath. Or on the warmth of our hearts. So I want to invite us to connect with our lineages, to see, to hear, to feel key figures or key energies. It could be a person, that comes from our lineage. See their face, we hear their voice, we feel the transmission. Or it could be more archetypal form, an energy form from the lineage. It could be someone that we've met, someone we haven't met. A feeling of a whole lineage of teachers going back. Or the blessing of a particular individual, the transmission of a particular individual. As you were growing up, what were the forces in the culture of the world, in the world community, that helped you become who you are, to help you become a person creating your own life? Slowly but surely, probably not as fast as you have wanted or as fast as you would have expected, but slowly, surely, over time, becoming more and more, living more and more of your own life. The mentors, the lineages, the people, the ideas, the movements that have supported you and continue to support you, becoming more and more of who you truly are. Of your unfolding in presence. And it's good to, for those of you who haven't worked with me, to see these people or archetypal forms clearly and close by. To hear what they say or the music, the sound. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. And to feel that empowerment in our bodies. And I wonder if it's true for you, as it is for me, that there are certain transmissions from lineages that I'm really determined to live out to the best of my ability. Because there's something very powerful and reassuring in that determination. to be an example of my lineage, my lineages, to the best of my ability. To live and die as an example, as a member, as a practitioner of my lineages. And for some of you, there may not be particular people, or the lineage may not have a particular name, but something came out of your culture in the 20th century that was positive, that was good, that was valuable, that makes a difference to the world. And even if that lineage doesn't have a name, it has a feeling, it has a flow, it has a direction, it has an energy. And the spirit of your people reasserting themselves in their wholeness through you and probably people of your generation, perhaps a movement, a spirit from your people, whether your people are cultural or other types of tribe, like personal development or spirituality. Your people may be your tribe or your culture, but certainly I hope that your people are your community, the people who see you, the other lineage members. People in similar lineages who recognize you. So let's just spend a few minutes taking the blessings, remembering the blessings of these empowering lineages. If there's any feeling of renewing your commitment to those lineages, that's great. And also perhaps the feeling of not doing this just for you and your family, or your profession, or your culture. We're doing this for the world. Even to be a global citizen. And although we don't have much time for this now, to apply the blessings and the transmissions, both of these lineages, and from the empowering aspects of our ancestors. To any of the collective shadows we encounter, to any of the ancestral disempowerments, applying all of this to how we can operate in a world where power is put above love so often. We can operate from love, from our blessings, from our transmissions in a world. It doesn't that easily forgets that. And during the days and weeks and months that come after this series of workshops, may we continue to bring the empowerment of our psychological and spiritual lineages, the positive empowerments of our ancestors, positive empowerments that we have from our cultures. To bring healing to our own psychological history, our ancestral history, our social history, and how we've responded to collective shadows. May this process of healing, transformation and growth continue naturally and easily during the course of the days and weeks, months that come. For our sakes and for the sake of the greater good. And when you're ready, let's gradually reorientate to the group. Keep connected in ourselves, but perhaps stretch. Turn our cameras on. Have a wiggle. It's interesting the difference between stretching with my upper body and wiggling with my hips. It has a different effect on me. So this is me flowering, connecting with the sky, and wiggling with my hips, connecting with the earth. What did you get from that meditation? Oh, Angela, I interrupted you earlier. Was there anything that you wanted to bring now? Or might it come in a few minutes? You're on mute. Yeah, okay.
It was my natural reaction to the fact that the worst is behind us. There is a part of me who thinks that maybe what we are going to face, depending how it goes, it could be even worse.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking about me.
Yeah. Oh, you, yeah, that, I don't know.
I'll be dead soon, so.
Sorry, not only you.
One of the terrible things for me is that I will be dead before the worst impacts of climate change. It's really a weird thing for me. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, that's true. That's true that there may be worse. Let's pray that there isn't. What else? Thank you, Angela. What else did you get from the meditation? Or are you're leaving today with? We've got 15 minutes. Angela, go again.
Okay, so there are two things that were interesting to me, probably because of the strong sense of independence I've been growing up. I noticed that I have also difficulty in connecting to a lineage, to have this sense of belonging. So, but I know that I feel it, the connection, but I cannot define myself by saying I am that or I follow this. There is really a part of me, an anarchistic part of me that say, no, point. And somehow I'm learning to don't see it as an issue, but actually as a resource. Potentially how I can not identify myself with a group or with a teacher. I really have also difficulty with that, to say, oh, I follow that teacher, or I follow. There is a part of me who really doesn't like that. And nevertheless, connecting to the energy of whatever I got. So I like that when you keep it more vague, like about connecting to the field, let's say, and not having to give a name.
Thank you, Angela. I mean, it is worth mentioning, actually, what you said, which is that very often the shaman or the witch doctor or the hermit lived on the edge of the community. And, you know, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have these massive institutions, like a bit like the Catholic Church, you know, lamas and then tulkus and rinpoches and all of this. The true enlightened ones are living separate from those communities. They don't want to be a part of those hierarchies. And very often, so there are people who are liminal, who are on the edge. And I know that you're on the edge of several communities, Angela. I just want to know.
Yeah, that's why I say I am able to connect to a lot of different worlds and community. I know I can do it.
Good.
And at the same time, I always have this sense I'm not completely into those communities. I'm always a step out.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Well, Jahan, I'd like to hear from other people. I really want to hear more people than the few voices that we've heard. So maybe we'll come back to you later. But I'd like to get more of a sense of other people. How was it for you? How was that for you? Georgianne.
Hi, Julian. I identify that thing that Angela just said, actually, about being on the fringes of lots of, anyway, but being able to identify as I am here. I'm actually right now by the Atlantic Ocean. I'm in the Northern Canaries, and there's the raging sea. And first of all, I thought, well, I should shut it out, you know, for this meditation. And then I thought, well, that's crazy. So I turned and faced it, and the sun. And for the first time in my life, I heard the sea. You know, when you said, you know, 4 sounds. I mean, there were far more than 4 sounds just from the sea. And I'd never noticed that before. The sea was just the sea. But in terms of ancestors, my initial thought, well, the sea's got nothing to do with me. But then I come from an island. And, you know, so many, I mean, the sea must have so much to do with me. That
yeah. And even more, Georgianne, we all come from the ocean.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I don't know how many million years ago we.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry, I muted you by accident. I'm sorry.
yeah, I've forgotten that. So that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on, finish your sentence and then let me continue.
Well, I mean, I would say, you know, that was amazing that I first of all, I thought, no, this is not what I'm, quote, supposed to do. I'm supposed to sit here, you know, go inside my ancestors and all that. And I thought, well, I can always listen to it again. So I trusted my instincts and I went with the sea.
Fantastic, Georgianne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, because just to mention to everybody, the model that I'm really interested in at the moment, which comes from Steve Gilligan's work with Creative Mind, which I'm going to introduce into my program, the Life Talent Program also. We've got individual mind, my wounds and my difficulties, my relationships with my parents and how that was transmitted to me, the stuff of everyday psychology. Then we've got, our ancestral lineage. We've got what we've received from our ancestors. Then we've got what we've received from our culture, both the positive, the positive aspects, but also the cultural shadows or the collective shadows. Then we've got what we've received from our spiritual and psychological lineages, which may not even be from our own cultures anymore. And then we have what we've received from nature. We are nature. We crawled out of the sea. I don't know how many million years ago. Our biology, the first single cellular organism, started in the sea. Then we single cellular organism, replicating multicellular organism, specialization to different parts of a body, and out of that, the emergent property of consciousness, perhaps. And then behind all of this, is spirit, as the ever-present origin, awareness, space, phenomena. There was non-existence, and out of non-existence came existence. And how do we know about existence? Through awareness. There is nothing else. There is nothing we can know except through awareness. And yet we're so close to awareness that we don't notice it most of the time. It's just a fact of life. It's like the fish swimming in the sea. What is this thing called water? And so that all of this is our lineage. All of this is our ancestors. And so that we want to include it all of the different levels of this. So this nature, Mother Earth, in fact, next week, I'm doing a 6-week course with Natasha Lithgow, who's spends a lot of time in nature, is a creative mind trainer, on nourishing yourself through nature, where we'll explore this more deeply. But, not only, one of the most powerful nourishments we can have is through our connection with nature. It's just, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the resource, the empowerment of nature, to connect back to that. And also we'll talk about the, in a relationship should be reciprocal, it should be two-way. Are we looking after nature as much as nature is looking after us? So that's a question for next week. So yes, Georgian, the sound of the sea is your ancestors, is your lineage. The sound of the wind, the sound of the air, the sound of the water, the fishing people, the way we've interacted with the water over all these generations. Those of us who are island people, that's deeply in our lineage. If it's really, that would be an interesting study to look at, where did your ancestors live? On what land did they live? Did they live on the flat? Did they live in the mountains? Did they live in the woods? Did they live in very agricultural areas or deserts? The spirit of the desert. Where have they been living in big cities for generations? How does that affect us? What's our connection? So, yeah, so much. Great. Unless there's anything burning, I'm going to do the final sharing. Jahan and Gianrico, are you waving at us or are you waving at someone off camera?
you know, my camera is a little bit. I want to share. As you said,
keep it brief.
doing the meditation, I understood it like this. That it's also your professional ancestor, and you talk about your connection to Gregory Bates, no? And then after this old Zoom trip, Zoom history and story, and I think we have to learn how to live with this technology. I saw during the meditation Paul Václavic, which was a scholar of Paul Václavic, which was a scholar of Bateson also, yeah, in the Mental Research Institute.
Paul Václavic, yeah, was a student of Bateson, yeah.
And I saw you also, and I say, okay, so I don't want to end like one who, and I decided the next course you give live, face to face, I will come to see you live because you're also a piece of my professional ancestor, you know.
Yeah. Thank you again, Rika. Yeah, and we all are, you know, we're all that for each other. You know, we learn from, we don't just have to have the big gurus. We can have, there are so many things, forces in our lineage. You know, your community is your lineage. Your spiritual, psychological, professional community is also, yeah, that's great. We don't just have to think about the big figures, but the Sangha is the Buddhist word, the community. Jahan, the last person to speak will be Jahan. We need to keep it brief because I want to have the final sharing.
Very brief. I'll keep it very brief. Thank you, Julian. I saw something today which I would love to share, which is about the ancestors. We always think that we are descendants of our ancestors and we are the results of what they've done, and we think of it in this manner and how can we make them proud. But then we are also the ancestors of the future generations. And we carry this responsibility. And that was something for me to reflect on really today.
Speaking as a mother.
Yes.
But we're all mothers and fathers, whether we have children or not.
We all are.
Yeah.
It's something that I consider as an energy rather than a biological property.
Yeah.
But we all have motherhood and fatherhood, and we're ancestors.
And I just want to gently question, Jahan, the thing about making your ancestors proud. I think we need to be very judicious about that, because the value, what success was to my ancestors may not be what success or integrity is to me. I have to, you know, listen and be aware, you know, but actually what success is for me and what integrity is for me and what having a great life is for me is different to that of my ancestors. And so I can sort of say, thank you, ancestors, for taking me so far, yeah, out of presence, out of awareness, out of, you know, I'm flowering in my own life. My presence is flowering. Let's all unmute and do, you know, what I like to do at the end. Everybody say a word or a phrase about how you're feeling right now.
Refresh.
Nurtured.
Gratitude.
Gratitude.
Grateful.
In awe.
To unconditional love and Aikido.
Curious.
Grateful to feel, also the difficult feeling.
Also connected with the world. This is such an important time. Connected.
Rooted and settled.
Thankful.
Who hasn't spoken yet?
And honoring.
Rooted. And R-O-U-T-E as well.
Mary, have we heard from you?
Powerful,
What did you say, Marija?
powerful.
Powerful.
And you?
Heartfelt, present, touched, very full. Great. Thank you.